Okay, this is part 3 of Nietzsche quotes. He says, fully mature intellects love truth, even when it appears plain and simple, boring to the ordinary person, for they have noticed that truth tends to reveal its highest wisdom in the guise of simplicity. Yeah, that's, for example, like what I'll talk about, academic orgasms. And, for example, to understand that atherosclerosis is a blood clot, that is like an incredibly powerful statement, because you'll have spent countless hours as a medical student studying atherosclerosis, and you really don't know what they're talking about. And then to know it's a blood clot, anything that causes clotting is an atherosclerosis risk factor. That is a very empowering insight, okay? High-fat diets cause insulin resistance, therefore cause type 2 diabetes. That is a powerful insight. And they also cause hypertension because they stick the red blood cells together. That is a powerful insight. Those statements sound simple, but millions and millions of people die every year because they don't know that, okay? Dr. McDougall's saying all large, healthy populations eat a starch-based diet. There are no exceptions. And then all these diseases are prevented by a starch-based diet, plant-based, starch-based diet. That's incredibly powerful, you know? All right. Nietzsche, all things are subject to interpretation. Which interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power, not truth. That's also the case. Basically, usually the ruler, they've got lots of money, and they can force people to believe pretty much anything, is what I've seen. Oh, fluoride is good for your teeth. No, it's rat poison. There's rat poison in your water, okay? And just because you say it's good for your teeth, it doesn't mean it really is, okay? But people believe that. The pros are so stupid, they'll believe anything. You can tell the pros literally anything, and they will believe it. Okay, I tell them all cultures are equal. What nonsense. You know, the Aztecs with a pile of heads, 1,000 skulls is equal to Western civilization. You know, all these backward-ass cultures, you know, South America, where they don't even have an alphabet, they're illiterate. That's equal to Western civilization that invented calculus, okay? You know, give me a break. It's ridiculous. Okay, Nietzsche. Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. Young people love what is interesting and odd, no matter how true or false it is. But a mature mind loves what is interesting and odd about truth. Fully mature intellects finally love truth. Okay, even when it's plain and simple. Okay, now we're kind of repeating that other quote. The intro was a little bit new. The surest way to corrupt a youth is to instruct him to hold in higher esteem those who think alike than those who think differently. Yeah. New insights are always going to be thinking differently. That's why they're new. Okay, here's a famous quote of Nietzsche. That which does not kill us makes us stronger. And that's completely untrue. If you sprain your ankle, that doesn't kill you, but now you're weaker. Your ankle's sprained, okay? So it's kind of stupid. I mean, don't get me wrong. You can learn from a difficult experience, but... All right, mediocrity is the most effective mask a superior spirit can wear. Because to the great majority, which is to say the mediocre, it will not suggest a disguise. Okay. There are two types of people in the world, those who want to know and those who want to believe. Okay. Yeah, to really know the answer to something takes, you know, about 50 times as much work as just to believe something. The doctrine of equality, there exists no more poison, for it seems to be preached by justice itself, while it is the end of justice. You can't make people equal, okay? Some people are big and strong. Some people are small and weak. Some people are really fast and smart with books or with numbers, or some people are great at music. Some people have a great voice for singing. Most of us don't. Everybody's got their own thing, so to try to make everybody the same is ridiculous. Everybody should have the same opportunities, but we're kidding ourselves if we think that everybody's got the same abilities and the same willingness to develop themselves. I think there's tons of people who got IQs in my ballpark, but they haven't been willing to study all day long, you know, for days on end, weeks, months, years, decades. So I just know more than they do. But, you know, I passed up a lot of social opportunities when I was young. Nietzsche, when marrying, ask yourself this question. Do you believe you will be able to converse well with this person into your old age? Everything else in marriage is transitory. Yeah, there's some truth in that. It's more important to be friends with a woman than it is just to like sleeping with her, because, you know, she's going to get older and lose her looks, and the guy to some extent as well. Nietzsche, What is happiness? The feeling that power is growing and that resistance is overcome. What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power. What is bad? All that proceeds from weakness. So he's very much into this power thing. Okay. There is a false saying. How can someone who can't save themselves save others? Supposing I have the key to your chains, why should your lock and my lock be the same? Okay. So yeah, I mean, Nietzsche's clever and he's kind of fun. But in the end, he's kind of sick in his own way. He never had a kid. I don't think he ever had a wife. I think he was a homosexual who died of syphilis. Okay, let's see, what else is next here? And by the way, I got a lot more quotes of Nietzsche. I just couldn't organize them all. There's so many of them. To understand another person is to imitate his feelings in ourselves. One will rarely err if extreme actions are ascribed to vanity, ordinary actions to habit, and mean actions to fear. Okay, here's a good one. Direct self-observation is not nearly sufficient for us to know ourselves. We need history, for the past flows on within us in 100 ways. Yeah, and I think that's true. Like Goethe said, unless you can give a good account of at least about 2,500 years of history, you're really not too well educated. And I would say it sort of begins with the ancient Greeks. You should know Genesis of the Bible, and you should know something about the ancient Greeks. You should go that far back in time. Most of the stuff before that is really not worth knowing because it's all, dictator of some ancient civilization, kicks everybody's butt, says, do as I say or I'll kick your butt, and then they never do anything, okay? They're boring. All the other ancient cultures, they're all boring. The Greeks were the first Westerners, the first people with significant amount of free speech that were interesting. Okay, he who has a why can bear almost any how. Yep, you have a purpose. Okay, then his ideas of the higher man. Basically, non-conformist thinking man he considers a higher man. And he says, individual madness is rare, but for entire societies it is the norm. Most people are too stupid to act in their own interest. I would actually say that's true. Now that sounds mean, but it's true. I have seen most people will vote for a politician if they're good looking or if they're sort of pleasant and charming, even though that politician has a policy that wants to genocide that person. I've seen it. I see that all the time. I have cousins that are from Ireland, okay? And like I said, they joke in Ireland they're either thinkers or drinkers. Okay, and these are not drinkers, but they think they're thinkers, but they're stupid. They tell me how they think the Democratic Party is so great, when the goal of the Democratic Party is to Jenna, then you know what comes next, side, the Christians. So it's like you're voting for a party whose platform is to genocide you. I'm like, are you stupid? And then I talk to them about more stuff, and it's just like, they just don't have knowledge in their head, and they can't reason, but they think that they're like philosophic. I'm like, you're just stupid. I mean, I'm nice to them, but I'm not impressed by their cognitive skills. Okay. All right, let's keep going here. Here we have our present age, bent on the extermination of myth. Man today, stripped of myth, stands famished among all his pasts and must dig frantically for his roots. There are two types of humans, those who belong to the herd and the higher human beings who have unifying life projects, men with historical perspective, men who are creative geniuses like Beethoven, and they are rare. For this type of work, the higher man requires solitude. He needs freedom and time away from the petty concerns of the herd. The concept of greatness entails being noble, wanting to be by oneself, being able to be different, standing alone, and having to live independently. Higher man remains oblivious to the petty concerns of the herd. The herd has no interest in the higher man. The higher man is largely invisible to the herd because creativity and deep insight do not matter to them. Therefore, higher man cannot talk of his insights with most of the herd. They don't care for him and they may resent him. The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. And I think there's a lot of truth in all that, because I noticed, for example, the more advanced I got in my thinking, the more I sort of like became invisible to a lot of my doctor friends, okay? When I was doing procedures that they liked, that they would want to send me a patient for, they were more interested in my thinking and like a little innovation on a procedure. Like let's say I do a common femoral artery ultrasound guided puncture. Like, oh, that's great. That's so clever. That's That's, interesting. But that's nothing compared to figuring out the mechanism of dementia. But none of them care. I got internal medicine doctor friends, and they're like, they don't want to learn anything new because then they'll have to like restudy their practice, or they'll have to think twice when they consult a patient, and they don't want to have to do that. It's much easier to just stick with the protocol. But I think if you make medicine so dumbed down that everything goes by a protocol, then you don't really need doctors. You can have a nurse practitioner do that. You don't even really need a nurse practitioner. You can have an RN do that. The patient just types their symptoms into a computer. But the reality is, most patients are so clueless, so old, so weak, so fragile, so cognitively slow. They need help. They need help just to have a conversation, yet alone type all their symptoms into a computer. Okay, Nietzsche characterized man as the highest man. People like rare geniuses like Goethe, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Newton, van der Weyden, Michelangelo, Raphael. But what I would say is, real geniuses are pretty rare. I mean, how do you define a genius? One definition would be IQ. So some people say 140, but that's kind of a joke because you're just talking about 99 percentile. And 99 percentile is obviously not a genius. Okay, 99 percentile is not going to do anything new and creative. And don't get me wrong, a lot of genius is not so much genetic intelligence. A lot of genius is personality. Are they able to transform a field? The only way somebody can transform a field is they have to be a maniac in terms of their dedication to learning that field, learning the fields around it, and being able to see something new. So that's a rare individual, and it's not like you talk about, the Gaussian distribution. That's a Latka curve because you need several things simultaneously. You need very high IQ, you need very high motivation, you need good health, energy, and endurance, purpose, availability of leisure time to do all that. So by the time you get to somebody who's going to transform a field, you're not talking 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000. It's about 1 in 100,000 to 1 in a million. Okay, these guys like Goethe, Mozart, they're like 1 in 100. They're like 1 in 500 million. Okay, they're freaking rare. So that's not going to happen, and that also means that that's not a realistic thing for a regular person to aspire to. Regular person can aspire to being a great coach, being a great teacher, being a great professor, whatever. But to be a great genius, that's a rare thing. Okay. So that would be, highest man might be like a Bach, Beethoven, and a Mozart. Higher man would be something who's just really good at what they do. A really good coach, a really good scientist, a really good clinical doctor, engineer, sculptor, musician. Okay. These men have an inner calling to seek excellence in what they do. This is called a goal-driven life, or a path to mastery. The other thing I would say is a person can kind of be like a social genius. My mother was that. She never once read a book in my whole life. But man, was she great at social, personal stuff. She made everything good for everybody. She broke all the rules. She could give a shit about rules. She could she could care less about propriety, about cultural standards, about any of that. But man, at a party, she'd make everybody welcome, everybody happy. And like all my dad's friends loved my mother. They're like, oh, your mother, your mother. Everybody loved my mother. I mean, literally, I walked into the tennis club. These people would run up to introduce me. There'd be a line of people wanting to introduce themselves to me to tell me how much they love my mother. Okay? She just made everybody happy. She was like a saint. She had a way to do that. Anyways, what he's talking about, though, Nietzsche, though, is this idea of focus and goal and achievement. Okay? He says the unthinking man, the herd man, has only hedonistic goals, like to get drunk, spend his money on hookers, things like that. Okay? And he says that's most men, in his opinion. They're like worker ants, he said. He said, with good leadership, these types of men, they're hardworking, they can do something great like build a cathedral. But if they have poor leadership, they will behave very badly. Okay? All right. He says, the mob man is lazy, jealous, and destructive. Nietzsche, do you want to have an easy life? Then always stay with the herd and lose yourself in the herd. Call me whatever you like. I am who I must be. The website called Academy of Ideas has good videos about Nietzsche. Okay. Again, Nietzsche to me, he's a little bit like Luther. He's entertaining, but he's a jerk. Okay. His hero is his hero is Napoleon and Bismarck. Okay. What kind of heroes are that? All right, for the world. Okay. And he hates Christianity. What are you going to replace Christianity with? what? Is that homosexuality? Give me a break. Where is that going to lead you to? Drag queen story hour? It's nonsense, okay? Okay, and then he's also, whenever somebody goes down the path of atheism, the next thing that always comes up is eugenics. And he says, the growth of wisdom may be gauged exactly by a man's diminution of ill temper. The best should only marry the best. Love should be left for the rabble. The best should not marry for love. The best should not marry for love. They should only marry for breeding purposes. That's like Plato has said the same thing in his Republic. He said, without good birth, nobility is impossible. Good birth and good breeding is the next step. After good birth and good breeding, the next step is superior education. Energy, intellect, and pride, these will make a superman. To have a purpose for which a man will do almost anything. The goal of evolution and society is the production of genius. What we need is strength. So we kind of had this idea that basically the pre-Socratics and the ancient Greeks had arete. They were proud and strong and noble and great. And that Socrates and Plato and Aristotle were kind of a bunch of pussies, okay? And Christianity, he felt, glorified the feminine virtues. And he felt Christianity was pussified, okay? But, it's all kind of confused. With Nietzsche, there's no clear, coherent message, okay? He's entertaining, he's got good quotes here and there, good sound bites, but he really doesn't have a big philosophic worldview that I think is useful to a person to live a good life, other than if you want to achieve greatness, you must be nonconformist. Okay, so I'll grant you that, but other than that, he's mostly a bunch of entertaining sound bites without a solid, coherent, useful worldview. That's why I find him more entertaining than useful. Anyways, I hope you found that of some benefit.